Hi everyone. So today I wanted to talk about the China-Africa relationship, and I think there are quite some things for us from us for us Africans from the diaspora to understand. Because we've been bombarded with all kind of imagery that China is the new colonizer and so on, and to some point those images are have a validity, but this is not the entire story. So I haven't found a complete judgment of these activities yet myself either, but let me explain, and maybe you can follow me where I'm stuck at the moment, and you can also create your own opinion, because history is often not as easy as it sometimes gets portrayed. So I'm a Tanzanian, and Julius Nyerere is the president of is the founder of the nation Tanzania. He's the one who diplomatically, brilliantly maneuvered the nation out of the colonialism into independence. And very early, Julius Nyerere started in front of the UN, started to advocate for the Chinese in front of the UN. Started just to advocate for them because he was just saying, hey, listen, there are about roughly soon 1 billion people on the planet that the entire West is constantly ignoring. You can't do that. Meanwhile, on the entire African continent, the war for decolonization was still completely in progress. So Tanzania became somewhat independent, but there were other countries who were not independent yet. And Nyerere, Pan-Africanistic as he was, wanted to support those countries, and what he needed for that was a railroad line from Tanzania to Zambia, downwards to Zambia, in order to support Zambian resistance fighters with weapons and supply. So of course he just said, "Hey, we Africans just want a little railroad. We would like to visit each other. Who is giving us funds for this?" And Nyerere asked everywhere in the world, and of course nobody was willing to give this newly independent country a loan. So he asked for the Chinese. Asked for the Chinese help, and the Chinese were actually the only one who said, "Okay, whatever, we're going to build you this railway. We give you the loan, and we're going to construct this railway for you, as it's also a Chinese company getting their contract. So it's kind of okay. We're going to do it." And that was kind of the first, or one of the first ties how East Africa and China somehow got to know each other and got in touch with each other. And this railway line, first it did its job. It supported people in Zambia and also in neighboring countries in the war and in the resistance war of decolonization. As it also left quite an impression on Africans, because there were Chinese coming and building that railway, and quite a number of Chinese died during their constructions. But the Chinese finished it. So there was quite of a way how China, and in this case Tanzania, got to know each other and got their first diplomatic bonds. Julius Nyerere was advocating for China in front of the UN. China built them the railroad line. So this is how these diplomatic conversations were somehow starting. And of course, over the time, the Chinese came, and the Chinese brought investments and so on. But of course, one needs to understand several things. First, the goal of the Chinese. The Chinese have since, first of all, those countries found together because, of course, the Chinese could completely identify with the war of decolonization. The Chinese were, in the 1960s, Mao was basically fighting against the entire world, had a war, I think around in the 50s or 60s, against the entire world, basically, and he actually won. So he could completely understand the necessity for decolonization, and also this colonial past is what somewhat brings the continent of Africa and China somewhat together, but only somewhat. Now, we need to understand China has two important policies. First of all, colonialism shall never ever happen again, which is one of the reasons why the Chinese are so mad nationalistic. but which is also something that makes them quite reliable, quite um, relatable for Africans. As the Chinese were colonized, the Africans were colonized. The colonization in China was not the same as in Africa, but they are a post-colonial country. First of all, China's policy is we never want to have a foreign power in our country dominating us. First. Second, China has a policy of constant economic growth. Constant economic growth. And they did this in investing major amount of infrastructure in their country. Today, when you look to China, China has one of the most advanced, most powerful, most huge and advanced railway and road systems having built through their entire country. So the Chinese construction companies have know-how. And one of the reasons why China is booming is simply because they provided a huge amount of infrastructure to their people, which is something the West simply does not understand. The West believes if we just make politics for the economy, meaning for the rich ones, then everybody will strive, and we still are stupid and believe in the so-called trickle-down effect and so on and so on. This is not the case for China. China invested massively in infrastructure that is very much more accessible to all of its people and compared to the West, which is probably also one reason why China is seen, except for racist reasons, China is seen as such a threat, because they engage in the growth of their nation in a completely different way, and it works damn good. They have high-speed railways, they have highways, they have constructed entire cities. One of the problems is that some of these cities are at the moment still empty, and their building boom was somewhat a bit of a speculation. But they do have know-how, they have great city planning, and they have, this is all stuff Africans can use. So now the problem is, because of their building boom, China is in debt. China is in very, very deep debt. And in the meantime, there are a lot of construction companies in China that are, since China has all its railways now, China doesn't know what to do with it. So this is one of the reasons why China comes now with this idea of the Silk Road, of building roads all across the world, and which is also a reason why China wants to provide infrastructure in Africa, just to keep its economy rolling, to keep their goals, their economic goals of constant growth, keep them growing, and in the meantime get some money back because they have debt. They have massive debt. So one negative point is definitely that China takes its own debt and puts it towards other countries, meaning like, okay, we need now something to construct. We are in debt. Don't you want to pay for our great roads in wherever in Africa? So this is one way how China is actually putting their debt distributing their debt all across the world. And this is something why I think this is problematic what China is doing, is one reason why I see it's problematic what China is doing. The other reason is because China is getting influence and is giving loans to countries where China knows they can't pay the loans back. In Southeast Asia, I have forgotten which port that was, but they have recently, and we have now the year 2019, recently they have overtaken a port in Southeast Asia for 99 years simply because the local government wasn't able to pay it back. So they have now a port on a strategically very important position, and they are just about to, and this is another reason why I see China very critical, they are just about to do the same thing at the port in Mombasa. Because China has built a railway and built a railway between Nairobi and Mombasa in Kenya, East Africa. They've built this railway, and of course this railway, in the first few years, this railway is not yet as profitable as people hoped it would be. So China is now threatening, I don't know what the next months will bring, is now threatening to overtake the port, or is threatening to overtake infrastructure in Mombasa. I'm not sure whether it's the train or whether it's the entire port, just in order for the country of Kenya to be able to pay its debt back. And this is something I see as very problematic, as also China. The things China has exported to Africa were partially very bad in quality. The things China has exported to Africa were also the people coming to the African countries sometimes behave very colonial, very exclusive, and just behave like, oh my God, we are hated in the world for being the Chinese, but at least we are not Africans, so we can kind of behave like the new colonizers. I'm currently in Nairobi right now, and I can say like the people who own restaurants, Chinese restaurants, treat the Africans partially very very questionable. And you see, of course, all the media and all the new reports where Chinese where, for example, the railways has only been operated by Africans for presentation purposes, but actually the people who are operating it are Chinese in the everyday business, as also Chinese people behaved like overseers and let the African workers do very humiliating things. So to summarize it from my personal African and African diasporic perspective, there is a lot China has to work on, really a lot, in the quality of products, very much in the quality of people they are bringing to the continent, as also, please don't put your debt onto people, especially on the people where you know they can't pay it back. And no. The thing with the debt, I mean, African countries can decide that themselves, obviously, but the contracts to those loans and to those infrastructure topics, they are not transparent. You can't. It's no possibility for the public to see them, and I think this is something that needs to change absolutely immediately. So these are a lot of critique points and problematic points where I'm not sure whether this friendship will flourish, or this so-called promoted friendship, this kind of investments of China. On the meantime, now the positive parts are one needs to understand, whenever the British or the Americans or the Germans or the French and so on, whenever they make an investment in Africa, which they haven't done until China started investing. China kicked something that wasn't a behavior that happened before from the Europeans. When they invest, it's called progress. Everybody's happy, like, yay, finally people recognize, finally our former colonizers recognize our worth. We get investments, we are growing, and so on. If China does the exact same, it is called the Chinese debt trap, the new colonizers. They're doing exactly what the West does, and when the West does it, it's celebrated. When China is doing it, it is the evil debt trap. Like, please, this is a double standard. It is racism. It is racism because it is anti-Asian racism, and it is also anti-African racism, simply because people behave like African governments wouldn't be able to make their own decisions. And as much as there are issues of corruption and whatever we have very much proven to be autonomous people. When we kicked out the colonizers, we have very much proven that we can make our own decisions. So I think the world should now, I mean, the world is a post-colonial world, and everybody's still hating Africans, but whatever, the world should understand that we are able to make our own decisions. And from who we take credit, we can very much decide ourselves. Now, first of all, we must understand everything that gets promoted as the Chinese-African friendship. Of course it's propaganda from China. Of course it's propaganda. But we should not behave like we would not be in a complete westernized media bubble, which is also propaganda. We are completely in a Western propaganda. What I currently see is when I watch CGTN on YouTube, CGTN is a China-African news channel. I watch Chinese propaganda, and when I watch BBC and something like and all those other channels, I watch Western propaganda. So I'm making myself aware that I'm always consuming propaganda, and I have to figure out my own picture and have out of these different impressions and images, I have to make my own picture of what seems to be credible at what point. And it's always nice to get kind of both perspectives. First. Second, the Chinese haven't committed any mass murders on Africans. So comparing them to colonizers is, yes, they're doing land grabbing, which is problematic. Yes, they have several practices, as I mentioned before, they're problematic, but colonizer like enslaving Africans, killing Africans, committing genocides, the Chinese haven't done that to African yet. So I think this comparison is a little bit theatrical, and I think is over the top. Simply coming from for the fact that the British or German or American investments are still welcomed, though they did genocide, they did enslavement, they did mass murder. So we should, I think, when we judge those engagements, we should really have one standard for everybody who is not African, and one standard really for everyone, for Europe, for Asia, for North America, and so on, and for India, for South America, everyone who wants to have their business and their activities in Africa, we should have one standard for everybody. Further, when America, or like when Germany in the 1930s and 1940s, when one of these Western countries wanted to change something in the world, they grabbed guns and they went out killing as heck. And this is what defined their influence until today. This is how America brought democracy over the world. This is how why the world, 80% of the world speaks English, because simply England has invaded about 80% of the world's countries. So we should not. And when China is trying to extend its influence, they come and say like, hey, I bring roads, I bring technology, I bring investments. Of course, it's an increase of influence of China, but I mean, what's the problem? 1 billion people bring a lot of knowledge, technology. What is the problem? And yes, I mean, of course, there are human rights problems in China, but I mean, like, fucking Europe is letting 10,000 of refugees drowning in the Middle Sea every year. So this continent is a shithole continent. The US is murdering African people in high numbers constantly. That is a shithole continent as well. So don't you come with human rights problems in these countries as soon as you don't have, as you're not white anymore, you are facing Europe's entire inhumanity, the US entire inhumanity. So when there is another superpower extending its reach, not through military, but actually through infrastructure, which the entire world needs, then I think, don't be like, oh my God, the evil Chinese extending their influence. We need those roads. We need those roads in Africa. We can need roads in Europe even. And I think in the US, the US wouldn't be angry about major infrastructure either. So I think the way how China introduces itself to the way is actually very nice. And I think this road initiative is actually very romantic. Yes, another superpower is extending its influence. You can criticize that. You should criticize it. But don't come with this double standard when bringing democracy was okay like 10 or 20 years ago, bombing the heck out of a lot of Arab and also African countries. But when China is coming with its construction workers, that is a catastrophe. Oh my God. So I think we should stop this double standard as well. And now, me having been in Nairobi, what I've learned here is if something is if something is not there, you need to construct it yourself. And due to post-colonial contracts and post-colonial conditions from Britain, for example, Kenya is not even allowed to process its own natural resources like coffee and tea due to very stupid economic contracts from the British tied to the British. Imagine you have natural resources and you're not allowed to process them yourself. I mean, okay, Kenyan companies are allowed to do so, but they had to pay fees in order to participate in economic communities that basically no Kenyan startup can afford this. No Kenyan startup can afford this. So now there is many African countries have issues, various issues, mostly coming from outside. Starting their own economies and their own productions. Second, China has knowledge, has know-how, and has a lot of, and does somewhat identify with the post-colonial history. As also China tries to, in its activities, China does something that the West does not. China brings infrastructure, and China also wants to empower inter-African trade. Inter-African trade. This is something the West never wanted. The West, like the British wanted, had a lot of fun when the Kikuyu in Kenya fought the Luo in Kenya. They have divided the cultures all the time in order to exploit them better. China is very much interested that Kenya trades with Uganda, with Tanzania, with Congo. China wants to empower inter-African trade. This is something where I have to say, I can work with that. I can work with that. And the next thing is also, for example, if you haven't known yet, the entire Francophone countries, like on the west coast, who were under French influence, every year they are paying colonial taxes to France for their independence. In order to gain independence, they had to sign contracts where they had to deposit a huge amount of their GDP in France, inside of France, every year, as an act of stability and maintain the currency stable. But I mean, it's simple. They are paying a colonial tax into French reserves, and if you would withdraw all those taxes, France would be a third world country. This happens until today, 2019. And what China now does is China comes to certain countries and says like, listen, France, this colonial tax stuff is kind of getting in my way. And so those post-colonial contracts with France also guaranteed France to be the first to have access to all kinds of economic opportunities or also natural resources. Now China wants natural resources as well. Now they are starting to conflict with France. And I kind of like that. I like when outside nations are beating each other up outside of Africa for African attention. So, I mean, no, first of all, no, China is not here to liberate us. They are not our friends. They are ruthless business people. But they bring trade. They bring trade, and they bring business opportunities which we really need here. And now, as you can see with all those interests, with all those foreign interests, as also with the entire history of China and Africa relations, I'm somewhat stuck between the. On one side, I've seen China overtaking a port in Southeast Asia, and they are threatening to overtake a port in Mombasa now as well. This is, I think, an attack to a nation's sovereignty that is unacceptable for me, which indeed brings them very much closer to getting called colonizers. But in the meantime, I see they bring infrastructure, and you only don't know what that means if your baby has never died on the way to the hospital simply because the roads were so bad. You only don't know what that means if you always had fluent water. I mean, here I'm still living in a good area in Nairobi. Sometimes the water pump breaks and we don't have water. But like, if this stuff is lacking, people who are not as privileged as I am, people have serious health issues. People have serious problems, and if somebody comes and brings a road, no matter under what conditions, if this road is there and prevents people from massive poverty, massive impacts, but just improves very basic life qualities, then I'm not judging African countries who just say, okay, listen, we need that hospital, we need this electricity, this power plant. Everything comes later. So to summarize everything, will I promote the China-African engagement or not? I am not sure. As I'm saying, at the moment I'm watching really much what is happening now in Mombasa, whether the Chinese really dare to overtake another port and really go into the nation's sovereignty. I see the problem that the products they're exporting to Africa sometimes have very low quality. On one side, I understand, because people here can't afford the same quality. People can't afford Huawei phones which have the price of an iPhone here. The things that are coming from China need to be functional and need to be cheap as well. But cheap should not affect product safety. So I'm seeing on one side a post-colonial country that is having, which makes it much more relatable than the British or the Germans or the Americans, non-black Americans. The ties between African Americans and West Africans are something else. Post-colonial country has a lot of infrastructure and knowledge to transfer, and actually actually investing in things that really benefits also the African here, which is not some kind of stupid Western development aid which nobody needed, but it is really benefiting this people, the economy, as also the various states. And yes, we should stop judging China by other standards than we judge Western countries on one side. And on the other side, of course, we have the Chinese behave like colonizers. Second, they are shifting their debt to African countries, and also I'm coming to the point. Shifting their debt, and they are, of course, the resources they export, or no, the business they bring is not always accessible for Africans. Also, the knowledge is not always transferred to Africans, and the fourth point, and I think this is the most important point for Africa, for all of us when we judge for us Africans, when we judge or Africans and African diasporics, when we judge our engagement with other communities. I'm telling you, as long as we don't have understood, as long as we don't realize that the entire world hates us Africans, as long as we haven't understood this, every new engagement will be full of wishes, hopes. Somebody non-black will release us from our misery or self-hate or whatever. No, we need to do this ourselves. And as long as we don't understand that the entire world looks down on us, every new engagement will disappoint us. So, no, the Chinese are not our friends, no matter how much they propagate this. They are neither our saviors nor nothing. They are ruthless business people. But in the meantime, I'm asking myself whether those ruthless business people might not be better than the other former colonizers who are just as ruthless business people. Who come, the colonizer, like when the Western countries come with investments to our country, they mostly tell Africans how to do politics in the meantime. You only get this money when you do this and this and this political thing. When the Chinese come, they don't ask questions. They just say, hey, listen, we want those resources, we bring you this money. We bring you this money. Do you agree or do you not agree? We can, and then we have a choice. So I personally think this Chinese-African relation does have a potential, but it does not mean that it necessarily will go well. So I think the best thing, what I will do is, I will watch them with a very close eye. And if they take over the port in Mombasa, or if they do other things, I think I might change my opinion, whether this has a possibility. This actually has a chance, because we also need to be aware when we talk of the Chinese or the new colonizers and so on. There's only one nation that has air forces and military bases all across Africa, which is the United States. And the Chinese actually just built one military basis in Djibouti, and the entire world freaks out. Where I'm like, please, can we please call out the United States before we talk of the colonizers of the Chinese? We have to unify our standards for everybody who is engaging with us, and then we have to be watchful who is doing the best job. At the moment, I personally believe the Chinese do a better job, but they only do a better job because everybody else has done such a miserable job before. So I am watching this, I'm watching their engagement, I'm critical, I'm curious, and maybe in a year I will do another video about whether this relationship has somewhat matured and the Chinese have somewhat worked on themselves, or if it really went wrong and the Chinese were really just there to exploit us. So this is the current state where I feel like it is much less obvious about which is bad and which is right. But I'm somewhat trapped. I'm somewhat trapped and looking this relationship very closely. I think this is now, and my concentration goes to an end. now I'm on the end of this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments. And yes, hope to see yourself, to see you, or to another video, to another topic. Have a good one.